I'd now like to introduce you to Felix, Neighbour, and Martin Turnbull, both from the Office of Disability, to do a question and answer session.
Hi everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to come along. I know this is a question and answer session, so I won't take up any time before we start getting some questions from you. We'll do our best to answer them, and if we can't, we'll certainly take them on notice and arrange to get some responses for you. I might perhaps just to kick things off, might be worth saying it's been a pretty busy time, and particularly a busy couple of weeks for the things that the state government is doing in areas that will be of interest to you. So yesterday we had the response to the parliamentary inquiry to abuse, and I think I saw in the entrance there a handout. So has everybody got that now? Yep. So that's a very important bundle of initiatives, including some important focus on advocacy within that package. Yesterday also was the release of the state government's 10-year response to the Royal Commission on Family Violence. So I know many of you will be interested in that. Again, I hope you'll agree, quite an important focus on people with disabilities and to diverse communities generally is reflected in that plan, and quite a bit of investment in a whole range of initiatives attached to that response. And then of course our office has been very busy not only with those things, but importantly with the upcoming release of the State Disability Plan, so the next 4-year plan, which I know many of you have been involved with us over quite a period now, a couple of years now, almost in shaping. So we're very excited that that's coming to a bit of a conclusion, and we think it's a pretty good plan with lots of really valuable commitments that will enable us to make some good progress over coming years. But we'll look forward to talking to you about that after it's released, which is planned for the 3rd of December. We've been pretty busy on all those fronts and many others, but we're really here today, I think, to answer your questions. So I think we'll just throw it open, will we? And yeah. Okay.
If you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll come over to you.
Hi Martin and Felix, it's Llewellyn Randers here from VCOS. I'd really like to invite you just to expand perhaps a little on some of the announcements that made yesterday, particularly the $1.5 million fund, which I understand is kind of a one-off capacity building innovation fund for disability advocacy services, and give us a bit of idea about how that might shape up in terms of what opportunities it's looking to fund, how the sector might engage in the use of shaping the direction of that fund, and what kind of timeframes you've got in mind for how and when that funding will flow.
Thanks for that question. I think that was an expected one. So we'll have much fuller details about this initiative available very, very shortly, but I can tell you a few basic things about it today. We're very pleased that the government's made available $1.5 million. It is money, repurposed money in this financial year, and it enables us to make a really good start with some of the findings that the review of the Victorian program has suggested to us about issues, gaps, areas of advocacy work and support that really need some attention. So that the idea of the fund is really that it will enable the funding of a bundle of initiatives in the form of effectively one-off grants. Those grants will be on the basis of submissions from the currently funded advocacy organisations within the Victorian program. And the idea of the initiatives that we'd be seeking would be that they would be time-limited projects. They might be quite short, small projects over a few months, or they might be work that you want to do over a slightly longer period through to around the middle of 2018. So there's capacity to do a bit of work over an extended period or something quite focused over a short period. There are 4 main areas where we're thinking that work might focus. The first, and all of these I might say have really come very much out of the review, so we hope they respond to things that are in your minds about what is needed. So the first broad area is about activity that might help all of you to better engage and support diverse communities, people who might be for one reason or another particularly isolated and a bit more difficult to reach. The second area is around actually some fairly direct support for overcoming particular pressure points where there might be waiting lists, where there might be some gaps in what you've been able to provide to respond to demand which people are expressing to you. The third area would focus more on systemic advocacy around particular barriers, be it to social or economic participation, particular issues that require a bit of focused energy, a bit of perhaps research, partnership development that you could do and hopefully have a fairly concrete result around. And then the fourth main area we would like this fund to help with is around strengthening what you might call mainstream consumer protections. So really that would probably involve partnerships with mainstream organisations so that you can bridge that gap between disability-specific concerns and the sort of consumer protections that apply to the broad population. So that very broadly are the sort of areas, a rundown of the sort of areas that we think this fund can help with. We propose to get this going as quickly as we can. That would involve essentially an expression of interest process invited from the organisations during December. We really want to allow as much time as we can for you to have a think about what you might do, how you might use some extra resources in that way.
And the submissions wouldn't be needed within December. That's when it would kick off, and we're looking at giving maybe sometime in February at the moment. So just giving you a bit of time to develop the submissions, just to make that clear.
Yeah. So plenty of time to have a think about that and to talk to us about ideas you might have. It will inevitably be a little bit of a competitive process, depending on how many groups put their hand up and have some ideas about how they might use these resources. So we will do our best to make sure that there's a good spread of activity. There'll be certainly an expectation from the Minister that we support activities across Victoria in metropolitan and regional areas. and that we have a good spread in terms of different issues covered, different population groups. So that's, in a nutshell, Llewellyn. Was any other parts of your question we haven't addressed? There were lots of questions.
Presumably, as it is repurposed within the current year's budget, that money will flow before 30 June.
Look, we would hope that most, if not all, of the money would flow before then. We'd like to think we could do it in one round rather than have to put you through multiple processes. Depending on the scale of the projects and how organisations operate, we might need to flow the money in a number of parts, a number of tranches. But look, essentially, we'd like to get the money expended as quickly as possible and let you get on with the work. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hi, it's Robin Gale from AFTO, the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations. With regard to that funding, is NDIS in or out of scope?
Can you say a little bit more about what the issue is?
If an organisation was going to apply for some funding in any one of those four categories, could it be inclusive of, NDIS access issues or anything to do with the NDIS? Right. Yeah. Sorry.
Look, I think the answer to that is possibly. We obviously don't want to duplicate work that is more appropriately supported by the NDIA itself, nor do we want to duplicate work that the NDIS transition support package, which the state government has provided, is designed to help with. But we do recognise that often the dividing line between when something is an NDIS access issue and when it's a broader community services access issue won't be clear cut. So trying to tease out some of those issues might very well be part of an initiative under this fund. But I think as far as possible, we would see this fund as tackling broader issues than the NDIS.
I suppose I'm kind of assuming you were here for an earlier discussion, and I shouldn't assume that. But earlier today we were talking about, there was a session around people who are ineligible for the NDIS, and a kind of a discussion that arose was around information and supporting people to know what their rights are with regard to where else they might be able to go to for supports. And that's it was a really specific disability advocacy issue. And so I just thought, just planting some seeds for some people in the room about that could potentially be something that they might submit on.
I think that's a very good point, and certainly as the NDIS rolls out, and there are people in that kind of situation, we will need to pay a lot of attention to making sure that they have access to the advocacy they might need around whichever alternative or supplementary parts of the service system they might need to use. So, yeah, thanks for that.
Anyone else? Nothing?
Somebody might have.
Just while others are thinking. I'm really interested, I guess, in hearing a bit more about the government response, particularly with, I guess, the structural changes around critical incident reporting. So my understanding is that the Disability Services Commissioner will have an expanded role in the future, and that the department will have, I guess, some money to develop a critical incident management system that is more, that works. And I'm just interested, I guess, in hearing a bit more about how that evolution and kind of oversight and monitoring systems are planning to be evolve in the future.
I think we're probably going to have to disappoint you in that we haven't come equipped with that level of information, given that our office doesn't have that core responsibility. And I probably don't want to step too much into territory that my colleagues are responsible for, but I know that there will be quite a bit more information about that being shaped up in coming weeks and months. So let's happy to convey your interest in getting some early information about that. But clearly that's an important part of the overall package, and something that's been on people's minds for quite a while. So again, it's, I think, a clear indication that the state government and our department sees itself as having a very important role at that level of monitoring and responding to what happens very much on the ground, even as the scheme rolls forward.
Kathy Barakis here. Just wanted to ask, I don't know much about the work that you do as the Office of Disability, but having a daughter with a disability, I know that education and employment are areas that she obviously is involved in. Just wanted to know how you work with the Education Department and how you work with EcoDev, and in particular the JVEN tender that recently went out that touched on employment, poor results for employment for people with disabilities, and how you actually represent people with disabilities in those departments.
Yes. So the Office for Disability is a small group of people, and we have very much what you would call a policy coordination role, and I guess a role that's about initiating work that we would then spin off and expect others to pick up. But the work on employment participation is very high on our agenda, and we are kicking off some new work in that area in a very close partnership with the Economic Development, Employment parts of government, and with the Public Sector Commission, Victorian Public Sector Commission, so that we focus on what the public service and the public sector can do, both because it's a very important sector for employment, but also because we would expect that sector to play a leading exemplar role in initiatives to support disability employment. So there was some new investment in that area in the state budget earlier this year, which we are now moving to implement. And the first stages in that is some taking stock of a kind of what works, what we think the most promising approaches are, and we'll be moving pretty quickly in the new year to some activities both in the public sector and with industry. The work in the public sector we think will be very much about seeing where we can put in place some slightly more targeted strategies than perhaps some of the more generic approaches that we've seen tried in recent years, but also seeing where we can make sure that we embed that awareness of what employers need to do on a regular basis, rather than seeing disability employment necessarily as sort of some special program or strategy. So I think there's a real opportunity there to get some more comprehensive action across the public sector. The work with the private sector, with EcoDev and others, we are currently just taking a bit of time to get the right model on, but we envisage that starting with some pilot strategies with 4 or 5 particular large, medium to large corporate employers who will identify where they think they have some opportunity, where there can be a win-win situation in terms of targeting some opportunities for employment, and it will work very much on what the employer needs to do to make the workplace and the jobs as suitable, as sustainable as possible for the people who pick them up. So that in a broad sense is what we're moving towards doing. It is early stages of what we expect to be a strategy that we roll out over several years. So we'll be in the new year in a stage with that where we'll be keen to come and talk to people with experience and ideas so that we can make sure we take that into account as we roll that forward. Anything you want to add to that, Felix?
Just about maybe how we work maybe more broadly with other government departments, pretty interdepartmental committee or something like that. So the office is secretariat to a committee of senior staff across government called the Interdepartmental Committee on Disability, and that's to talk about key disability issues that have relevance across government, and a big part of that has been the State Disability Plan. So in addition to specific work with different departments, we engage with other departments more broadly as an office, just at a broader level as well.
So look, on the employment strategy, we have recently employed Lucy McCarley, who some of you might know, to lead that work, and it might be appropriate at a future meeting of this gathering to invite Lucy along, and she can update you just where that works up to in more detail.
Anyone else? Slowly
You're not going to let us off the hook, are you?
No, well, there's so many unanswered questions, Martin. So obviously this year both the NDAP and the Victorian Disability Advocacy programs have been under review, and I'm really interested in what you can tell us about, even at a high level, the kind of outcomes that you might be looking for from those reviews, and what the process for communicating the findings of those reviews might be, or at least your own review, to the sector when it's available.
Sure. So the last part of that's the easy part, and I'm very pleased that I can report that there will be a short, hopefully pretty accessible statement of the outcomes of our state program review coming out very, very shortly. I'm looking to Felix exactly when we think. Coming days?
Yep, coming days
yes.
is short enough, I think. Yeah.
So the minister's just recently agreed to get that out. So I think that's a very timely thing, obviously, to let you know, and we really didn't want that to hang there too long before getting that advice back to you. That will still be, well, it's got quite a lot of different elements. It'll be still reasonably high level. One thing we will say in that report and more publicly is that in addition to the Innovation Fund that we were speaking about a little bit earlier, we're also committing to do some fairly intense work with all of you and others over the next 6 months or so to develop a longer term development reform plan for advocacy in Victoria. We think that's probably about the right time frame that will also enable a bit of sorting out and clarity with how advocacy sits within the NDIS. That's obviously not 100% clear yet, and also obviously how the national program will realign itself. We had some discussion just last week with the Commonwealth Department about that issue, and they seem now much more keen to work with us and to see how we align the two programs. I think there is a need for some sorting out so that it's a bit clearer what the aims and objectives of each program is. I think without wanting to preempt the outcomes of that work, the Victorian program clearly needs to play a very important role in making sure that different parts of the Victorian community and different parts of the service system that is funded and managed and supported by the Victorian government is very much part of everything that's happening to support people with disabilities. So that'll be a very clear focus that we want to retain. We don't think a national program, will ever be equipped to pick up entirely. But it is a little bit about aligning all the pieces and making sure that nothing gets left out, that we don't leave important gaps. 6 months or so is probably about the right time frame to aim to sort that out.
Any last question?
I've got just one to help finish it off, and it kind of leads on, I guess, from your previous answer, because obviously you guys have there's been a whole lot of really big pieces of work pertinent both to the advocacy sector and the state disability plan. And I just, looking forward, it kind of feels like we're coming to the end of a whole lot of big pieces of policy work and planning work. And, looking forward into 2017, what do you think are the issues that, or the processes where the disability advocacy sector can engage with you or the Victorian government more generally to really progress the rights of people with disability?
Yeah. So I do hope there'll be many relevant processes, and I don't think any one process could capture that adequately, but certainly one of the important ones will be the one I was just alluding to in terms of how do we develop with you a much more forward-looking plan for how advocacy services are structured. What's the architecture, if you like, of the system across the state? And that's a bit of a bigger picture set of issues, and we'll need to find some quite structured ways to engage with you around that, because they are quite complex issues. We obviously have the Victorian Disability Advisory Council, which Felix's group looks after. They have recently refreshed their membership, some new members, a new chairperson will be announced very shortly, and we certainly would see that group as playing an important role in advising government on advocacy issues, and in order to do that, they obviously need ways to be out and about, talking to you, getting intelligence from you. So that's a very important conduit as well. Clearly in the area of the NDIS, the government is continuing with a range of consultative structures. The implementation task force, which I think meets again next week, will be an ongoing mechanism, and they will be interested in these issues as well. So they are a few of the mechanisms.
The economic participation strategy, maybe reinforcing that again about engaging with this group about that.
Yeah, so in the context of the work we were mentioning about the economic participation strategy, that will inevitably require some focused consultation as well. I think the other thing, while we're talking about employment and the workplace, is that there are various engagement structures and advisory groups, I think increasingly being used certainly across public sector organisations, and I know several other government departments have formed various structures. Sometimes they are framed a bit more broadly around diversity, and people with disabilities are a focus in many of those structures. So, we'd be keen, through the interdepartmental structure that Felix was referring to earlier, to make sure that there are ways in which the needs of people with a disability in employment situations can advocate for their needs to be met successfully as well. So it's just another type of engagement mechanism.
Any last questions before we close up?
Have you ever wanted to ask the Victorian government about something? Here's your chance.
There'll be another opportunity, but...
Anyone? Not tempted?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.